Everyone knows the Polish comeback story. 30 years ago, economists called it the most successful economic transformation in modern history. Today, Poland is the largest economy in Central Europe, a NATO fortress, the industrial backbone of the continent, and one of the only countries on Earth that did not fall into recession during the 2008 financial crisis. Not once. Poland is supposed to be the proof that shock therapy works, that discipline pays off, that a country can sprint from communist ruin to European powerhouse inside a single generation. Poland is quietly approaching a ceiling. Not dramatically, not in a single crash, but structurally, silently, and with a momentum that is already locked in. The miracle is real, the foundations underneath it are temporary. And in this video, we are going to walk through exactly 4 structural threats that are quietly converging on the Polish economy right now. The end of EU funding, the collapse of the birth rate, the death of cheap labour, and the geopolitical burden of becoming Europe's shield. Because understanding why booms end is the only way to understand how real wealth is actually built. To understand what Poland is facing today, you have to go back to the winter of 1989. The Berlin Wall had just fallen, the Soviet Empire was disintegrating, and Poland, a country that had been carved up, occupied, and nearly erased from the map more times than most nations can comprehend, was staring at a blank page and a collapsing economy. The government made a choice that was almost insane in its speed and severity. Under Finance Minister Leszek Balcerowicz, Poland launched what economists later called shock therapy. Price controls were abolished overnight. State subsidies were cut. The currency was stabilised. Trade was liberalised almost instantly. In a single stroke, Poland yanked itself out of the planned economy and threw every door open to the market. The first year was brutal. Inflation spiked. Unemployment surged. Living standards collapsed for millions of ordinary Poles. But the architects of shock therapy understood something that pure political caution never would have accepted. Half measures would leave Poland trapped in a slow bleed. Only a complete break with the old system could give the country a real chance. And it worked. GDP began recovering by 1992. Foreign investment started flowing in. Western companies spotted what they could not ignore. A large, educated, disciplined and desperately motivated workforce sitting right at the doorstep of the European single market. By 2004, when Poland joined the European Union, the race was already accelerating to a pace that nobody had quite predicted. What had looked like an act of economic brutality had become the foundation of a genuine miracle. But here is the part the textbooks skip. The miracle did not happen in a vacuum. Since joining the European Union in 2004, Poland has received more than 161 billion euros in cohesion funds. That number needs a moment to land. 161 billion euros, channeled into motorways, railways, airports, broadband networks, universities, and industrial zones across every corner of the country. In the 2021 to 2027 budget cycle alone, Poland is the single largest beneficiary of EU cohesion policy, receiving more than 76 billion euros, a figure unmatched by any other member state. The results are visible. You can drive on world-class highways through the Polish countryside and forget for a moment that this infrastructure was almost entirely built on external capital. Warsaw's skyline has transformed. Logistics hubs have multiplied. Connectivity to Western European supply chains has become seamless and reliable. But here is what the infrastructure photographs do not show. Every euro of that money came with an expiration date. The 2021 to 2027 framework is already in progress. What comes after it is not more generosity. What comes after it is the mathematical reality of a country that has been reclassified. Poland's GDP per capita, adjusted for purchasing power, is now crossing the threshold at which European cohesion policy begins treating countries as contributors rather than recipients. The free money era is not ending because Poland failed. It is ending precisely because Poland succeeded. That is the trap. The infrastructure was built on subsidized capital. The question nobody wants to answer out loud is, what happens to an economy built on that foundation when the subsidies stop? And the answer has already been written in countries that got there first. Look at Greece in the early 2000s. EU funds poured in. infrastructure expanded, growth statistics looked excellent, and the underlying economy never developed the productivity engine to sustain any of it. When the subsidies receded and the accounting came due, there was nothing underneath. Look at Portugal in the 90s. The same pattern. External capital built the visible surface of a modern economy, while the organic private sector remained too thin, too dependent, and too undiversified to carry the weight independently. Poland is not Greece. The comparison is not that simple, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Poland has a far stronger manufacturing base, a more diversified export sector, and a culture of institutional discipline that the southern European cases largely lacked. But the structural warning is real. Subsidized investment and organic investment are not the same thing. One is pulled by the gravity of returns. The other is pushed by the bureaucratic logic of drawdown schedules and eligibility windows. The roads are spectacular. The question is, what travels on them, and who owns what is being transported? The majority of Poland's industrial infrastructure serves the assembly and logistics operations of foreign multinationals, German automotive suppliers, American technology firms, and South Korean manufacturers. Poland is extraordinarily efficient at being other people's factory. It builds to specification, ships on deadline, and operates within cost. But the intellectual property, the brands, the margins that compound over decades, those travel back to headquarters in Stuttgart and Seoul and San Francisco. That distinction matters more than any highway. But before we talk about what Poland makes and who profits from it, we need to talk about who is left to make anything at all. In 2024, Poland recorded approximately 252,000 live births. That was the lowest annual birth figure in the post-war period. For context, Poland registered over 720,000 births per year in the 1950s. The total fertility rate has now fallen to 1.099 children per woman, making 2024 the 12th consecutive year in which deaths outnumbered births. To understand how a country arrives at a number like 1.099, you have to trace the sequence backwards. It began with the EU accession of 2004. When Poland joined, the borders opened, and roughly 2 million people, the majority of them young, educated, and in their prime working years, left for Britain, Germany, Ireland, and the Netherlands. They built lives elsewhere. Many had children elsewhere. That emigration wave did not just take bodies out of Poland, it hollowed out an entire generational cohort precisely at the moment when those people would have been forming families and producing the next generation of Polish workers. What remained was a population that was already aging before it had finished growing wealthy. In 2024, nearly 24% of Poland's population was above retirement age, compared to just 12.8% in 1990. The median age is now 43.5 years and rising. Statistics. Poland projects the population could fall from 37.4 million today to as low as 28.4 million by 2060, a decline of 24% in just 35 years. This is not a projection about distant future discomfort. This is a structural constraint that is already compressing the labour supply, already straining pension obligations, and already reshaping the cost base of every industry in Poland today. The manufacturing model that made Poland irresistible to foreign capital was built on a specific assumption: a large, young, literate, and affordable workforce showing up reliably to the factory floor. That assumption is now being tested in real time. Poland has responded to the demographic shortfall with immigration, and by European standards the numbers are substantial. Over 1 million foreign workers are now registered in the Polish social insurance system, the majority from Ukraine, with growing populations from India, Colombia, Nepal, and Bangladesh. The influx has softened the immediate labour shortage in logistics, construction, and light manufacturing. It has kept production lines running. But immigration is a painkiller, not a cure. The Social Insurance Institution has itself warned that it would be unrealistic to expect migration alone to compensate for Poland's demographic collapse. The workers arriving are concentrated in lower wage roles. The skilled, experienced mid-career Polish technicians and engineers who left for Western Europe 2 decades ago are not being replaced by that same profile. The age pyramid is still inverting, the pension system is still accumulating pressure, and the fundamental arithmetic has not changed. A workforce that is shrinking and aging will cost more per output unit every single year that passes, which creates the next problem, because Poland's entire competitive positioning as an industrial nation was built on one thing above all others: price. For 2 decades, the pitch to foreign manufacturers was straightforward. Come to Poland. The workers are educated, the infrastructure is world-class, the logistics are excellent, and the wages are a fraction of what you would pay in Germany or France. That spread, the productivity-to-wage ratio, was the engine of Poland's industrial boom. That spread is closing. Polish minimum wages have risen sharply and consistently. Average manufacturing wages have roughly doubled over the past decade. Labour costs in Poland are still lower than in Western Europe, but the gap that once made the country the automatic first choice for relocating industrial capacity is narrowing every year. Meanwhile, competition from Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico, and increasingly from AI-driven automation is offering lower-cost alternatives with no demographic ceiling attached. The automotive sector, which accounts for a significant portion of Polish industrial output, is already under pressure from the broader European transition to electric vehicles. The supply chains built around combustion engine components do not map cleanly onto the EV ecosystem, and Polish suppliers have not yet secured the same foothold in the new architecture that they built over decades in the old one. When the labour cost advantage disappears completely, Poland needs to have already replaced it with something else, something that does not depend on cheaper hands, but on smarter ideas. And that transition, from imitation to innovation, from assembly to invention, is precisely where the most structurally stubborn ceiling appears. But first, understand what it costs to fund a national reorientation when nearly half your economy is underwritten by foreign decisions. There is a phenomenon that economists have documented across dozens of countries at the same stage of development that Poland is entering now. They call it the middle-income trap. It works like this. A developing country grows rapidly by absorbing established technology, deploying cheap labour, and integrating into global supply chains as a low-cost producer. The formula works brilliantly up to a certain threshold. Then it stops working. Wages rise. The cost advantage erodes. But the country has not yet built the innovation infrastructure to compete on the basis of ideas and intellectual property, rather than on the basis of price and volume. Poland is approaching that threshold with extraordinary speed and with the classic warning signs already visible. Ask yourself, name a globally recognized Polish consumer brand. Name a Polish technology company that has disrupted an international market. Name a Polish pharmaceutical, a Polish software platform, a Polish luxury brand with worldwide reach. The honest answer is that outside of a handful of exceptions, most of what Poland builds brilliantly still belongs to somebody else's brand architecture. This is not a cultural critique, it is a structural one. The capital allocation that poured into Poland over 30 years was overwhelmingly directed at production capacity rather than research and development. Building factories is faster than building laboratories. Assembling components is more immediately profitable than developing the proprietary components that command the premium margins. The economic logic made complete sense in the growth phase. It becomes a liability the moment that phase ends, and it is ending. Because the final threat does not arrive from the market, it arrives from the map. Poland is spending more on defence than any other NATO country, not as a percentage of a small economy. As a share of GDP, Poland's defence expenditure reached 4.48% in 2025, the highest among NATO member states. Poland has announced its intention to reach 5% of GDP by 2026, which would make it the highest defence to GDP ratio in the entire alliance, surpassing even the United States. The geopolitical logic is unimpeachable. Poland shares a border with Belarus and the Kaliningrad exclave of Russia. It is the forward logistics hub for NATO's eastern flank. It has watched Ukraine absorb a full-scale invasion. For a country with Poland's history of occupation, the decision to spend heavily on defence is not a political choice, it is a civilizational memory. But every zloty spent defending the eastern flank is a zloty not invested in the R&D infrastructure, the domestic startup ecosystem, the university research programs, and the public services that sustaining a high-income economy requires. In absolute terms, Poland's defence budget now stands at approximately $44 billion, the 6th largest in NATO, and the draft budget for 2026 pushes it even higher. A country cannot simultaneously fund the most aggressive military build-up in the alliance, absorb the demographic costs of an aging population, maintain competitive public infrastructure, and redirect its entire industrial economy toward innovation without making brutal trade-offs somewhere. Poland is doing all four at once. The question is not whether it can afford the army, the question is what it cannot afford as a result. There is a law that governs economic development that no country has ever escaped. Physicists call it gravity. Economists call it convergence. The faster you grow, the harder it becomes to keep growing at that pace. Every percentage point of GDP that Poland gained between 1989 and today was earned in conditions that were, in retrospect, uniquely favourable. Communism had left such extraordinary inefficiencies in place that simply removing them released decades of suppressed productivity in a single decade. EU accession opened markets that would otherwise have taken generations to penetrate. Cohesion funds built infrastructure that private capital never would have funded at that speed. The labour pool was educated, affordable and abundant. None of those conditions is permanent. Most of them are already expiring. What Poland faces now is not failure. It is the brutal arithmetic of maturity. The era of catching up is ending. What comes next requires building something that has never existed before in Polish economic history. A self-sustaining, innovation-driven, domestically owned industrial and service economy capable of competing on the basis of ideas rather than advantages that time will inevitably erase. That is a harder problem than the one Poland already solved. The shock therapy of 1989 required a single decisive political act. What the next phase demands is a generation of sustained institutional investment, cultural recalibration, and strategic patience, pursued simultaneously against a demographic headwind, a security threat on the eastern border, and a fiscal constraint that is only going to tighten. Poland has survived partition. It has survived invasion. It has survived communism. Whether it survives prosperity is the question that the next 30 years will answer. If you found value in this breakdown, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, and tell me in the comments, do you think Poland breaks through the ceiling, or does the gravity of wealth win? I will see you in the next one.